I've wanted to cover Tides of War for a while now on the channel, and don't worry, I will be going over my tips and recommendations for the challenges in this post, but besides my previous lack of free time to keep up with it, there's been a strange problem looming over the monthly challenges for the past 6 months. This guy. Behold the humble campervan. With tech tree upgrades and enough HQ levels, this bad boy is arguably the best defender in the game, even if you can't directly heal it. And therein lies the problem. The threat that most enemy units face to most accounts with operators that can deal enough damage is quite minimal, to the point where both J-Fun and Sunny Senpai's clears for the majority of these are AFK bombardments of the center, with Horn, via meta, or a combination of the two. The problem is that it's so simple and effective to the point where it feels like my suggestions here either wouldn't really matter that much, or are easy enough to figure out on your own. While I do make it a point for myself to be able to explain why things work, rather than only showcasing that it works in the first place, if it's straightforward enough for even me to pass it off, something's wrong. But I'll get into that later. Let's get into my guidance first before some of you think I've been held hostage by a fellow ArcTuber. Because of how Arknights is balanced, all that's really required for the base tanking strategy here is a steady source of suitable AoE damage, and a little bit of healing if they get harassed. Horn and Fiametta fit the bill, but if you don't have them, or if you're looking for alternatives and side upgrades that can make up for the difference, the following is what I'd recommend doing or substituting as a starting point for your alternate strategies. Firstly, as always, check the conditions. Weather has been known to change in these, so don't be surprised if a lightning strike takes out your units while the corrosion damage triggers. Some of these fights also have buffs or debuffs in effect for enemies and allies, so be sure to work around those in your team draft if they're impactful enough. Next, consider attack ranges. Horn and Fiametta work so incredibly well here because of their long-range attack and quote-unquote true AoE splash damage. They'll be able to keep out of harm's way and hit all of the enemies clumping up around the campervan without too much fuss. If you don't have them, or if you don't have a subclass substitute like Fire Whistle or Meteorite built, other sources of quote-unquote true AoE are great to use, such as ambushers or splash casters. You might need to draft medics at this point to heal off harassment from ranged units or weather, so consider their effective healing ranges carefully so that your placement isn't compromised. And bring extra high ground for repairs just in case. Ask me how I know in the comments. I'll be there. Finally, if you must use more resources on top of that, focus on your best damage output enhancements. This is a base race after all. Make extra attack food for better damage, craft some SP batteries for more skill triggers, or pull up your logistics operator buffs and take full advantage of their enhanced effects within the HQ and forward camp. There are now many more options available now to fuel your Reclamation algorithm campaigns and to cover your weaknesses. If you need to turn the difficulty down to farm up some extra upgrades, there's no harm in doing so. Now if you're able to use the base tanking strat, that's about it, but if you're planning on actually building up your forward camp and using it for strange territories, here's a basic layout that you can try building and upgrading yourself. Surround the campervan with a wall and extend diagonal walls outwards to the corners. Seal up one of the corners to force that corner's pathing to wrap around, and add high ground platforms at least 2 tiles away from the outer edges for your units. If you have access to the necessary resources, add camouflage to the walls as necessary, prioritizing the corner sections. There's a few good reasons it looks the way it does. The first notable feature I'd like to highlight is the diagonal walls that extend outwards to the corners. These use less total resources than a square perimeter wall, but it still gets enemies to walk the same distance. Only the blocks in range of the enemy ranged units need to be upgraded to tier 3 to grant them camouflage. If you're rich enough to upgrade to the 0 block walls, you could, but if you don't have enough resources for camouflaging all of the walls, you can sort of get by with about 12 camouflage blocks for the corner extensions. You can then simply hold out against ranged units at the entrance corner and let melee units leak through to the campervan if your defenders can't take the heat. The next one is the wide kill box. There's a lot of exploding, splash damage, or ranged enemies thrown in the raid compositions. This layout should keep most of that away from the thin lines of wall blocks that are uncamouflaged. Bear in mind, you might have to make emergency repairs or expand it outward a little if you find that enemies are somehow punching holes or getting shifted. You could rely on strictly low ground units inside the kill box, but feel free to add some high ground in there if you're able to defend it. In addition, if you find that your base is somehow not tanky enough to withstand the barrage, this consolidated single path allows you to slot in medics and defenders in front of it to mitigate some of the damage. The last major highlight is the high ground platforms for the long-range DPS units. These are great for units like Ifrit or Fiametta to lay down pain from relative safety, with a pocket medic if they need to survive the weather with more than just logistics operator regen. There's 3 sides, which means they form a nice concave so that you can slot in 3 long-range DPS operators, or more, at the same time. Just be sure to double check the ranges, especially if you're setting up defenders. You may need to shuffle around some positions to ensure coverage. Anything beyond this you can build up if you have the extra resources, but if you're saving your budget for other projects, this base layout should serve as a good starting point for defense holdouts. The perimeter maze gives you extra time to prepare, and the camouflage blocks creating a single path incursion should mean less structures to repair too. And that's kind of it? There isn't much special about these challenges other than mixing up the unit composition and throwing in a couple of mostly ignorable modifiers and weather. The only one even remotely challenging in my opinion was Month 4's Tournament Tour, and even then the strategy could still mostly work with only a few boss killers added to deal with the bigger threats. What I had been hoping for in these challenges are conditions that would require you to perhaps build a decent maze to delay fast-moving troops in a base race. The first one almost sort of did that, but not really. Or boss units could have meaningful interactions against the camper van specifically that could really disrupt this kind of strategy without discouraging the use of constructs altogether. Unfortunately, this isn't the case. By the time you probably have a good enough account to start sinking your teeth into Reclamation algorithm proper, you're probably going to be too overpowered to even care about trying to do anything but the base tanking strategy. It certainly doesn't help that it's tough to incentivize more elaborate base defense setups when they're expensive and costly to build. The fact that you don't have to pay for repairs doesn't really change this at all either. In my case, I ended up saving enough resources to build my basic perimeter maze and keep it up, but even then I ended up gravitating towards just laying on more AoE DPS like the rest of them. Why spend more resources on fancy layouts and traps when we've got numbers? I think this is one of the relatively rare misses in Hypergryph's gameplay design and balance, where instead of incentivizing players to pay attention and engage with mechanics when they're presented, these challenges are kind of replaceable. Once you've played one, you've kind of played them all, and there's not much point in developing your team, skills, and tactics for the next one. Now, on one hand, I get it, I'm a launch player, and these are time-limited challenges to mildly reward players who have played the game mode a free, easy win for their troubles at this point, you know? Also, as a permanent game mode, it would suck to have tougher time-gated content be too hard for players to really sink their teeth into before it expires. However, given the fact that these are going to be permanently available once all of them are rolled out, it feels like they've missed an opportunity to make something fun out of it. It's especially weird to me because Arknights is a game I normally hold in very high regard, in part because it really encourages you to get better at the game, while allowing for enough flexibility that gacha RNG and player waifu or strategic preference don't end up ruining the difficulty. Take auto-battling, for example. In most other gacha games, auto-battling plays the game for you to the point where you're just not really incentivized to pay attention and learn new mechanics when you can just shove stat sticks into your party and steamroll all of the content. To me, it's kind of a sign of cowardice. The developers aren't confident enough in their core gameplay to hold your attention, or maybe the publisher is, and so they offer to just have the gameplay itself, without your input. Arknights doesn't do that. You must clear a stage first to enable the auto-deployment function for that stage, and even then, it mimics your exact deployments, down to the exact timing. Anything that's left to chance could have the possibility of failing, which encourages you to narrow that chance down by fielding stronger units, or playing more effective strategies. When new enemies or mechanics are thrown in, it's still usually in your best interest to pay attention to how it works too. Even if you are trying to copy a clear guide, your account and your units could be different enough to warrant changes. So, in Hypergryph's case, it feels like they're confident enough that their core gameplay is already engaging enough to not offer complete automation, but rather player-made automation. And that's quite a high bar to set for the rest of the game, design-wise at least. Contrast this with what I said for Tides of War. Quote, once you've played one, you've played them all. Even if you still have to deploy the units manually and do the thing, it still feels like there's no substance, and that whoever was in charge of making these challenges were probably resting on their laurels, or couldn't think of something worth experimenting with. The allied buff modifiers haven't really justified the cost of trying super novel strategies, and the enemy modifiers don't seem to pose much of a threat against a well-fortified camper van. You could fortify the base with your own constructs and defenders to mitigate damage, but since Tides of War fully repairs the base afterwards, there's kind of no point if you know your camper van can survive the assault as the main tank and you'd rather use your resources elsewhere. Anyways, if this metagame changes, I'll be sure to make a follow-up on this. If you play on CN and there's an upcoming one that will challenge this strategy meta, feel free to let us know in the comments. Otherwise, throw enough AoE, tech tree upgrades, and HQ levels, and these Tides of War are pretty much just Tides of Bore. Easy enough for most, but not very engaging for all, and I just wish it could be better. Simple as. And that'll do it for this post. If you subscribe on YouTube, look forward to a channel update, more guides, and even more posts and videos planned soon. I am also a YouTube partner now, thanks to all of your support, so a massive thank you to everyone who's subscribed already. I'll be going over what that means for the channel, and how you can support my work here in that channel update post and video. Over on Twitch, I'm finally picking up streaming again with my fully streamed Reclamation algorithm playthrough, having just recently finished the final boss of the main story campaign, so if you want to hang out while I finally push through Slug Racing and Feral Strange territories, stay tuned for the release of my streaming schedule over there in the channel update. If you'd like to reference my gameplay to see how I dealt with challenges as they were presented, the full playthrough is archived on Twitch for now, so check that out there too if you're interested. And, of course, you can find me elsewhere on such as Discord and Blue Sky, links in the description. Thanks for watching, and hope to be back soon.